Okay, I'm now at this third lecture about Iraq, which called Imperial Grunts. Um, so I'm in this first point, games and structure, and here's the slide of what I'm going to talk about for this lecture. Okay, when we look at what is so far a relatively small literature about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, I'm just trying to think about, towards the end of the Vietnam War, the great bulk of the good writing was still to come, and it was really going to occur between sort of 1970, the end of the war, 1975, and probably 1995, so 20 years after the war. The odd thing about these two wars is that they've been going on for so long. We're already at 20 years, effectively, after the beginning of the war. And we still haven't really seen the kind of fiction that came out of Vietnam, which has been very interesting. And science fiction, almost not at all. The genre fiction's not at all. There are so many soldiers out there, and relatively few of them have written narratives other than the sort of autobiographical memoir narrative, which is very common. And it's often true that the first book by a veteran writer may be the only book. And I'm not judging that. It's just how it is. But you can see immediately how much these authors owe not only to the Vietnam War prose authors, but also to postmodern literature, because they're not writing straightforward, then I did this, then this happened, what a terrible time I had, basically, or, the stories that are modernist, which would be something like, I don't know, Hemingway's stories about World War One, or Norman Mailer's stories about World War II. You just don't get this kind of narrative. So one of Phil Clay's book, Redeployment, which has a collection of short fiction, which is 2014, I do recommend. And they're very well written stories. We'll see whether or not Phil Clay turns out to be another Tobias Wolff. Tobias Wolff was a Vietnam veteran and is a superb short fiction writer. Okay, so it's just interesting to see. It's like, where is there going to be good literature? And we don't know. I mean, you have to wait. People have to take time. But certainly Clay's book, which was the book that won the National Book Award, sort of like who wins the Pulitzer Prizes, who wins the National Book Awards. These books are considered to be sort of like the stars. Ben Fountain's book, which I put in two little pages from, I think, in the course pack, Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk, I think is one of the best. It's about the war, but it's not actually set in Iraq. Although there are sort of flashbacks to it, or Billy's memories of it. But it wasn't written by a veteran, which is intriguing. The same year that the Ben Fountain's book was up for an award, and so was The Yellow Birds, which was written by a veteran. And Fountain's book won the award, and the veteran's book didn't. I think that was the National Book Award. Anyway, so Clay says in his story, Redeployment, the problem is your thoughts don't come out in any kind of straight order. You don't think, I did A, and then B, and then C, and then D. You try to think about home, then you're in the torture house. This is on page 40. Now, we've seen this from O'Brien, right? So we recognize this pattern immediately, where the narrative is destroyed and revised repeatedly as we are witnessing it. It's always hard to know if a soldier author is going to go on writing, as I say, Sergeant Price, in this case, cannot control the narrative the way he'd like to. He flips back and forth between Iraq and America until the two begin to fuse. And this should seem, this is going to be familiar if you've read Slaughterhouse-Five. So again, famous books that come out of World War II. Joseph Heller's Catch-22, Slaughterhouse-Five, to some extent Gravity's Rainbow. But Heller's book, Mailer's books, Vonnegut's books, written by veterans. And so there's a difference between these texts. But anyway, so Sergeant Price is sort of, he's just sort of like, he's a victim of circumstance. And Clay uses the problem of the dogs to show us just how bad such a connection can be between home and the war, where, he says there were dogs in Iraq, and he gets home and he's got to deal with his sick dog. And so the war is going to intrude and sort of become this massive thing in the room, the elephant in the room. And similarly, when focusing on form and structure, particularly, there's Gavin Kovite's very fine "When engaging targets, remember." And there he offers a sort of combination of war game, where we're positioned as a first-person shooter in a video game, and it's also a sort of a choose-your-own-adventure story. And I'll put up a slide of it here, where it's sort of like, I was like, what does this thing actually look like? Let's construct a little narrative. And Kovite appears to give us agency in the story, because you get to choose which way you're going to go. It's like, go here, okay, turn, go on to the next paragraph, or jump, whatever. So we seem to have control over it. But in fact, that's not how it works. So, he says, crouch down in the turret and pop up to scan every 20 seconds, turn to section 2, turn to section 3. This is on page 160. So here's a slide of what the Kovite story looks like. So you can see sort of that he's having fun with it. He knows very well that even though you're apparently choosing your own adventure, you're not actually choosing your own adventure. There's just this illusion of agency. And Colby Buzzell, who wrote a really excellent and suitably hilariously ironic dark memoir about his time in a Stryker unit, simply called My War. This is 2005. One of the earliest very fine accounts, because a lot of the accounts are sort of, they just aren't well written, so you have to be interested in the account, and you have to be interested in the account for a couple of hundred pages, enough to sort of grind through the sort of, and then we got up and did the same thing again, But anyway, he has this jaded, wasted character, Specialist Dunson, who knows just how pointless it is to fight with the system. And he says, so I remembered what the drill sergeants always told me, play the game, on page 98. And so what game is being played here is sort of what the question is. Is it a video game? Because remember that this is really the first generation of soldiers who have been playing video games all their lives. They have grown up playing video games. Okay.